John Cena brands himself as this ultra-muscular man's man, but one slip of the tongue where he called Taiwan a country, and next thing you know, he's begging like a dog to the Chinese government. And this was because China was going to ban the movie Fast and Furious 9 because John Cena was showing support for Taiwan. And by John Cena going to China and begging for forgiveness, he saved the movie $136 million. And that's only one odd occurrence. Another example being Tilda Swinton, who is a Scottish woman doing the movie Doctor Strange, where she does play a character who's a Tibetan man in the comics. And that brings the question of why Ben Kingsley played the character of Mandarin in Iron Man 3 when that character is supposed to be from China and a character who hates the Chinese Communist Party. And why were the ghosts such a big part of the first two Harry Potter movies, but in the sequels they're almost never there? I'm Charles Perrault, and today we're looking at why if you love free speech, horror movies, and black people, you should definitely be concerned about China ruining movies. In 1972, President Richard Nixon became the first president to go to China, trying to expand relations between the US and China. And that was because China and the US didn't have a good relationship after China became a communist country in 1949, and they were on the opposite sides of both the Korean and Vietnam Wars. And the fear was that China could ally with Russia and overpower the United States, so Nixon decided to go to China to promote things such as trade, travel, and even movies. And that takes us to 1994, when the movie The Fugitive was the first film ever that was made in the United States released in China. And it really wasn't considered that much of a big deal money-wise, where the movie made $369 million globally, but only $3 million was made in China. And after theaters and distributors got paid, Warner Brothers only made $400,000 from China doing The Fugitive there. But that was the year 1994, cut to 30 years later, and China has now had a massive economic development. In 1994, China had a GDP of $564 billion, which was nothing to the US, which was at $7.3 trillion at the time. But now today, China has a GDP of $17.5 trillion, and the US has a GDP of $27 trillion. And now the average Chinese citizen makes $6,100 US per year, which might not sound like a lot, but that's a 1,500% increase from 30 years ago. And this has led to a massive increase in the importance of China with industry, where they spent $7.7 billion last year in movie theaters, which to compare that, the US spent $9 billion, putting the two countries at a virtual tie money-wise. And this just shows how China is becoming an increasingly important factor to how Hollywood makes money, with one big example being Avengers Endgame, where Endgame made $632 million in China, which means 22%, or a little over $1 in $5 came from China. And with $728 million coming from the United States, it means for Avengers Endgame the total earnings were near equal between the US and China. And just to show the growth, the first Iron Man movie only made $15 million in China, which was only 2.5% of the earnings. And this massive amount of money shows why China is becoming so important to Hollywood, but it also shows a huge risk for the movies we all love. And starting off with China, we have to look at horror and supernatural films, and I'm going to go to one of my favorite franchises, Harry Potter. And with the first two Harry Potter movies, there was a heavy presence of ghosts being shown throughout Hogwarts and the rest of the film. But after the second film, they basically disappear from the story. And even though Nearly Headless Nick had a huge scene talking to Harry in the fifth book, that was never shown in the movie, and the character of Nick was barely seen in future films. And the reason the Harry Potter franchise did that was because China does ban most movies that feature ghosts, and they are very against that in their culture. And this can be seen because China's banned a lot of series such as Ghostbusters, The Exorcist, World War Z, and pretty much anything else that features ghosts or zombies. And when Harry Potter was first released, China wasn't a huge factor, not even being 2% of how much money it made. But then cut to the final Harry Potter movie, they made $60 million in China, and it was 5% of total earnings. And this does create a problem because 18% of movies that come out are horror related, up from 3% just 40 years ago, but those movies could be in jeopardy due to the reliance on China. And the reason is simple, and that's just the producer knows they can make 20% more money not doing a horror or supernatural film because it will be allowed in China where a horror or supernatural film will not. And that's just one genre of movies, but China could also impact an entire race of actors. Now we're going to cover how China is actually impacting black actors and how they could actually cost them work in Hollywood. With the first example being Black Panther, which was a huge hit for Marvel, making $1.3 billion globally. Which, just to compare, the second Ant-Man movie came out the same year as Black Panther, but it made less than half the amount of money at $622 million. But when we go to China, it was a completely different story. With Ant-Man 2 making $121 million in China, which was 20% of the total earnings. But Black Panther only made $105 million in China, which was about 7 or 8% of what the movie made total. So this creates a big problem where even though Black Panther made over twice as much money everywhere else as Ant-Man, it still managed to make less in China. And there were also issues marketing Black Panther where the distribution company in charge of China's release didn't believe it would sell to have a black actor with Chinese audiences. So they actually edited on a masked Chadwick Boseman's face to not reveal to the public and posters that there was a black actor doing this movie, and they just called it Black Panther. And the same distributor did the exact same thing to John Boyega when Star Wars Episode 7 came out, where with the poster that the US and Europe saw, John Boyega was seen very present in the poster itself. But in the Chinese poster, he's barely shown in and only in a small section, and that was designed just to not show people there was a black lead to the movie. And this also goes for The Little Mermaid with Halle Bailey, where it only made $3.6 million in China. And just to compare, Beauty and the Beast, which was also a live-action Disney remake, made $100 million in China. And this was largely due to Halle Bailey being a black actress, and Chinese distributors just didn't want to invest into it. And this does seem like a clear case of racism with Chinese audiences, where they just don't want to see movies with black lead actors, and from that it could lead to black actors not being able to find the same amount of work in Hollywood. And that's how actors can suffer due to China, but stories can suffer as well. While Donald Trump was president, The Simpsons did an entire music video making fun of him, and also shows like Saturday Night Live and many others did it as well. And this isn't out of the ordinary, where Trump, Obama, Biden, Bush, Clinton, they've all had pop culture make fun of them, and it's just part of American tradition. And this is because in the US we do have some very strong protections on freedom of speech, but those don't exist in China. In 2018, Disney released the movie Christopher Robin, which was a live-action sequel to Winnie the Pooh. And the movie was banned in China, but it wasn't because of a supernatural element or anything like that. It was banned because there was a meme saying that Chinese President Xi Jinping looked a lot like Winnie the Pooh, and that was popular in US culture to make fun of him for it. So a harmless family movie designed for children was banned because of the fragile ego of a world leader. And this is just one piece of proof that whenever China feels like their ego is touched, they will just ban a movie or series as a result of it. It's why both Tilda Swinton and Ben Kingsley played Marvel characters who were Asian in the comics. It's because Kingsley's character in the comics is someone who hates the Communist Party, and Swinton's character is someone from Tibet and seen as pro-Tibet. They also had an incident where they tried to control the movie Spider-Man No Way Home because it had a strong feature of the Statue of Liberty towards the end of the movie. And they did give them an offer for them to CGI at another building, saying they wouldn't ban it if they do that. And Sony and Disney shockingly decided not to listen to China on that one, refusing to get rid of the Statue of Liberty for the movie. But based on Spider-Man Far From Home making $204 million in China and Spider-Man No Way Home making 80% more money globally, that means the movie cost itself about $350 to $400 million by having the Statue of Liberty in it. So even though Sony and Disney didn't cave in that particular situation, it's very unlikely they'll use the statue again in future movies. And then there was also the movie The Dark Knight, which was banned in China in 2008 because it does have a mobster in the movie who is a Chinese national. And there also was a very big fight scene in the movie done in Hong Kong, and China didn't like it, saying it made their authorities seem weak. And that was in 2008 when China was a smaller part of the movie industry, but today that scene would just never get made. And this just shows how China is very bad for writers and creative people, where anything that's seen as remotely anti-China will not get made in Hollywood because they can't distribute it there. And this goes past the scripts and into what writers do in their personal lives. Hollywood tough guy John Cena is promoting Fast and Furious 9, but then he decided to make the simple move of calling Taiwan a country. And this angered the Chinese government, which doesn't see Taiwan as a country, and they have expressed signs of wanting to invade and take over in the next couple of years. So because John Cena just said one thing that was pro-Taiwan, he put the movie Fast and Furious 9 at risk, so he had to go to China and apologize to everyone. Which sounds like a very coward thing to do, but that one decision made them $136 million, or 19% of what Fast and Furious 9 made. And this was one of many cases where China's foreign policy or policies in general didn't work with actors. Where today, 88 celebrities in the United States have been banned from entering the country of China due to things they've said or done. Harrison Ford was banned from China in the 90s because he went to the Senate to show support for Tibet. Lady Gaga was banned from China for meeting with the Dalai Lama. Brad Pitt was banned from China for 25 years because he made the movie 7 Years in Tibet. And even Keanu Reeves, who is 1/4 Chinese, had all of his movies taken off of Chinese streaming services because he went to a fundraiser supporting Tibet as well. There was also the Friends reunion where Lady Gaga did an interview for the special, which was featured everywhere in the world except for China because she's pro-Tibet. And this just shows how on issues with China or that part of the world, actors simply do not have freedom of speech. And it also makes it so that Hollywood has to bow down to the Chinese government with everything they do. At the end of the live-action Mulan movie, Disney made a special point in the credits to thank the Xinjiang territory, which is part of China and where they filmed the movie. And the Xinjiang territory is a place in China that has heavily anti-gay and heavily anti-Muslim policies throughout the entire territory, where 1 million people there for a variety of different reasons are actually kept in things very similar to concentration camps. And being anti-Muslim and anti-gay, they're against groups that Disney says they support, but not when it involves dollars and cents. And speaking of Disney, there's also their CEO Bob Iger, who retired as CEO of Disney in 2021 and was replaced by Bob Chapek, who previously ran the theme parks. And before that, in 2020, Bob Iger was briefly considered to be ambassador of China when Joe Biden was taking office as president. With the logic being that Bob Iger worked so much with China he would make a good ambassador, but he was seen as too pro-China and ultimately lost the spot to someone else. And for Bob Chapek, when he did become CEO, revenue, profits, and theme park attendance all went up, but the one thing he couldn't do was get movies approved to go to China. Where the reason was never really explained, but for some reason the Chinese government just didn't like Bob Chapek the same way they liked Bob Iger. And the moment Bob Iger returned to being CEO of Disney again, their movies began getting approved in China, and from that it just shows how much having a CEO who knows how to grease the wheels in the Chinese government helps. And this also creates a real issue where people working in studios might not be able to keep their jobs if they do show some evidence that they're anti-China because movies could be banned because of their involvement. So looking at how China runs things as a whole, it really is a risk for people on all levels of the entertainment industry, making it so that hiring someone like Lady Gaga or Harrison Ford actually puts studios at a huge risk, so just because they do things like support Hong Kong, Tibet, Taiwan, they could be at risk of losing work. America and China are in a new Cold War, and it is affecting everything in our lives, including our media. And the current relationship is hurting us heavily. We can't tell stories the way we want. We can't hire the actors we like. And we might see a lot of lost opportunity for black actors in the process. All due to this reliance where the oppressive Chinese government controls anything and all studios see are dollar signs. And really looking at it, we just have one of two solutions. The first being that the US just works out a new deal with China, which would mean something along the lines that if the US continues regular trade relations with China, they have to agree not to ban any US movies coming in. And that wouldn't get rid of every single problem, but that would get rid of a lot of problems for fears of actors being censored and also fears of censorship in writing in general. And the second option is we just begin to reduce our relationship with China as a country and we no longer release movies there at all. And sadly, I don't believe the first one will happen, and I think eventually over the course of the next 5 to 20 years, we will get something resembling the second option. And this does show the dark side of foreign policy impacting our entertainment, but with that, I'm Charles Perrault, subscribe to learn something.